If you'd like to become a .NET developer and are only starting out completely from scratch, this video is a roadmap on what you should be aiming to learn. Now, having watched a number of roadmap videos, typically there is a very long list of things to know. And it's just not realistic to expect anyone who's completely new to software development to follow along. I always ask myself a very honest question. If I was only starting out right now today, would I be able to cover all those technologies in about 12 months and be in a position to be a useful employee? A junior developer who can add useful value to any team? And now most of the time the honest answer is going to be a no. My opinion is that most of the developer roadmap guides only make sense if you've already been coding for at least 6 months and you've already done some extensive research. My other small issue are the claims that you will be employable and make some cash from just merely following the roadmap. This is only going to be true if you've invested a good chunk of time learning and then creating some functional applications. And now this can be anything from a few months to a number of years, depending on what you end up working on and the types of projects that you work on. So ultimately, just before getting started, the main thing to understand is that there's just no quick shortcut around becoming a very competent software developer. It is going to take a couple of years to get a handle of most of these technologies, just for the simple reason there's just a lot that a developer has to know. In this video, the focus is going to be on the more realistic and specifically geared towards a completely junior developer who's going to be starting from scratch. The goal is to be a very well-rounded junior .NET developer. Now, there's no universal definition of what a junior .NET developer is, but for the sake of having clear targets and milestones, this would be one definition. A junior developer has to be able to create a simple working application that can use a database. This application does not have to be of any coding standards. It might not meet any security targets, does not have to scale or follow any good architecture, mostly because a junior developer will be relying on the support of the more experienced team members, and then sometimes you're also going to be using AI. Okay, so now the following list of things to know would be like the bare minimum. First, some basic working programming language, such as C#, having some generic understanding of object-oriented programming. At the very least, be able to connect to a popular SQL database via what is called an ORM, such as Entity Framework. You have to be able to write simple test cases for the code using a framework such as XUnit. You should be able to save or backup the code to a storage, or what is probably known as a code repository such as Git. And then for development projects, you must be doing some kind of project management and work tracking by using agile methodologies such as Scrum and Kanban. Most of the work will be done using an integrated development environment such as Visual Studio. Visual Studio 2026 is the current version. Now, all of this would be almost like a requirements or the minimum specification of what somebody or an employee or somebody who's hiring would be expecting a junior .NET developer to be able to do. I would estimate it takes roughly 6 to 12 months of learning and training. And if you were to spend about 4 hours a day consistently, so 4 hours consistently, 4 days a week, within around 6 to 12 months, you should start to have some good grasp of what .NET web development is about. Now, I want to get into detail about the actual roadmap. Just as a disclaimer, again, this is specifically geared towards a junior developer, and it's more high-level theory learning and less on the hands-on practical skills or the coding. So the emphasis is trying to get a high-level view of the important aspects of software development right from the start. So just making you a slightly more complete developer. So you're going to be able to move on to the intermediate or the senior phases much quicker. This is based on my actual experience and a long list of mistakes as a failed software developer. And at the time of making this video, I haven't been employed for a number of years. So, I mean, it's fair to sort of not maybe take this advice, or maybe take it with a whole pinch of salt. But in other words, if I was to personally start my career again today, my junior phase, which would be, I would put a maximum of 2 years for being a junior developer, I would want to avoid losing time being stuck. So that would be the one main goal. So the goal wouldn't be to write an application, or to have a long list of apps, or to understand, hands-on details, but just use this first phase, or this first two years, sort of knowing as much as possible and getting a high level view of pretty much everything to do with software development. That would be personally my goal. I don't want to be stuck trying to create this big application, but then there's a whole lot of other parts or other aspects I don't know. Most other videos by other content creators, they sort of go into the opposite direction by claiming the best method to learn is by doing. And I strongly disagree that your goal should be to reach the senior developer level in the most optimum time. So with taking everything into account, within 3 to 4 years you should be a senior developer. Looking at this long list of things that a senior developer should be knowing, which should be your ultimate goal, even when you're starting right now, let's say you don't know anything, your ultimate goal should be eventually to be a senior developer very, very relatively quickly. Most of these items do take a long time to master. There's no two ways around that. And in my opinion, the best strategy is to minimize coding while you are still undertrained, and just avoid churning out a lot of projects as a junior, and those projects don't meet standards, or they just won't scale in the enterprise. Now, the phases, how I would sequence my entire career projection, as a junior developer, I would split this into 3 phases. The first phase is going to be very high level or very quick learning. Then we get into the detailed passive learning, and then finally the hands-on practical development. Phase 1, which is just the high level learning, you only learning at a superficial level, and it's about getting a high level view as quickly as possible. And here's a list of items that you should know about. And this phase is more like literacy and not about actually doing any practical coding. Very simply, you're going to be doing a lot of passive research on each of these topics, and you will be covering them repeatedly over the rest of your development career with just increasing the understanding. So there's no need to try and master them completely. And you shouldn't have any worries or anxiety or feel confused or intimidated by large volumes of things that you don't know. Now, first thing is going to be a development stacks and frameworks. You must know or just understand what .NET is all about on a high level, and understand that it is a framework. You can simply do this by going to the .NET websites, where they give you the high level view of what you could be doing with this framework. You must also have a very good understanding of what a full stack developer is, and this is typically somebody who can do the front end, meaning the design with the HTML, and then the back end, which is going to be coding the actual logic and the program. Then also doing some sort of advanced database, not just simply saving to the database. Once again, at this phase level 1 level, it's mostly about just being literate and just being aware of most of the terminology. Now you're going to move on to the programming languages. The main language to use is going to be .NET C#. You're going to have to be aware of the other languages such as Python, which became popular because of the machine learning boom. Then also be aware and know about JavaScript, which is the most popular front-end web-based language. Again, at this stage, do not get too deep into any language, just have a very high-level summary understanding. You're also going to have to know HTML, CSS, which are for the front-end web. There's also Link, which makes it easy to connect to the C# application to communicate to the database via an object relational mapper such as Entity Framework. So then on a high level, you should also know some SQL, some basic relational database query. Now when it comes to tools, most of the development will be done in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio has a lot more features, and it's going to be a much bigger installation, and I would actually recommend Visual Studio for when you are starting out. So use the bigger Visual Studio and not the more lightweight Visual Studio Code. At this stage, you're also going to have to be aware that there are other IDEs outside of Visual Studio. And then towards the end of this first phase, you're going to have to do an introduction to some of these following topics, such as object orientation, clean code, understanding why automated testing is important, agile methodologies such as Scrum and Kanban, the concept of DevOps and why it is crucial, and especially source control, AI for code generation. Make sure you understand the difference between vibe coding and spec-driven development. And the most important topic that even as when you're starting out as a junior, you're going to have to be aware or know the concept of technical debt. So it's something that I would feel you must definitely look into. Once again, phase 1, avoid as much possible any coding, avoid spending too much time on a single topic. Don't spend all your time trying to master C# in 6 months only to try and move on to the other little thing to master it. Because programming languages are typically, they're quite big. They aim to serve different purposes or different applications. So if you're gonna try and master one programming language, you're gonna simply just spend too much time, and even the most experienced developers only end up using just a fraction of the language. Now, the main goal, once again, is to have a very detailed high-level view of many aspects of software development, specifically .NET, not just master a single programming language. How much time should you be spending on this first phase, phase 1? Anything from a month to about 3 months, again only at a high level. You should expect to be lost, confused. Most of the deep understanding will just follow with time. Phase 2 is going to be the detailed passive learning. And you're still doing passive learning in that you're not trying to build an app here, you're not trying to get too deep into any one topic, and you're still limited to junior level. And again, at this phase, I would just avoid trying to be too hands-on. Now, the temptation could be that you're going to try and use AI to create an app. If you go that route, you are going to very quickly realize the process of trying to make this app is going to eat up a lot of your time when you have to correct the AI generated code, because it's not going to create perfect code right from the gate. But now you are not skilled enough to try to debug and understand why the code isn't working. So now the core learning for this phase is going to be programming languages. You're going to have to invest a lot of time on those boring long tutorials. Obviously AI is going to be a great help. The simplest place to start would be with HTML and CSS. You are going to have to get deep into C# and JavaScript. Have JavaScript maybe as a much lower priority. I would actually even skip JavaScript at this phase. It is a very, very, very important language. It's not that I'm not trying to minimize it, but simply because your plate is full with stuff to try and learn at this phase. You're also going to have to learn in detail the following. Once again, object orientation, clean code, solid principles. You're going to try and memorize as much as possible clean code and the solid principles, because you're going to need to be able to just sort of out of memory just recode them later and spit them out. They're not going to make much sense at this stage, and it's only going to become clear once you've done a coding for large projects. You are also going to have to learn Git in detail, but also maybe just appropriate for a junior level. Git can also become too large and too many things to learn with Git, but just maybe a basic introduction of Git at a very junior level. And you have to make sure that you understand the motivation, the reasons, the benefits of automated testing. Topics such as test-first development, test-driven development, unit testing. The most important concept that you absolutely have to understand, again, make sure technical debt. You have to know everything there is to know about technical debt. Again, this phase can take anything from 3 to 6 months, and I stress to be high level, hands-on, be casual. Simply just cram, memorize, take in as much information as you possibly can. At the end of this phase, make use of AI a lot to test your knowledge. Do a lot of quizzes that are generated by AI, and make sure the prompts are clearly indicate that you are at a junior level. Now, after the first 2 phases of only taking in as much information by passively watching a lot of videos and a lot of AI explaining the concepts, a lot of reading and a lot of research, you can then focus on building some applications. This is where you should expect things to start moving at a much slower pace. You should expect to be stuck, to spend hours fixing one simple bug, to be troubleshooting, a lot of pulling your hair out and a lot of frustration. You will have to use all the concepts learned in the first two phases. For one, you will need to know how to use Visual Studio extensively, how to arrange different parts of the solution. You will be writing automated tests for the application. You will have to create a small application using .NET that is data-driven. Maybe limit the application to about 4 to 6 database tables. This is typically called a CRUD application, meaning create, read, update, delete. The simple application will be a website that can take input from the web, from a web form, and then save it. It sounds very simple, but I mean, you could spend 2 days just trying to create this simple application. Now, the front-end technology, I would suggest, initially start with the Razor pages. You do have the option of using MVC, which is another good versatile technology, but it might be a little bit too much to learn if you're only just starting out. And it's not, if you are up to the challenge, it's okay if you want to learn and go that route of learning MVC as well. So now this would be my roadmap for a junior developer that is only starting out with .NET. The emphasis when starting out is to get as much to know and cram as much information as you possibly can. And like I said, my main goal from my personal experience is to avoid getting stuck in the mechanics of trying to create a perfect app. And you should be spending the first few months just learning and having a very detailed high-level view of the entire landscape of .NET.